Thank you, listeners. It is time to dive into Elko County school news today with our Elko County School Superintendent, CJ Anderson, who has been at it throughout the holiday break and brings us lots of news and updates today after even yesterday's regular school board meeting. So welcome, as always, CJ. Thank you for being on our program today. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. I know it feels like yesterday, but that was actually 2 days ago. It was on Tuesday we had our board meeting.
Thank you. Today is Thursday. You are right. You are correct. It's been busy. I was at a fair board meeting last night. I'm going to a TV district meeting tonight. So a lot of meetings. Elko County commissioners met. So I did not make the school board meeting, and that is always something that I regret. So that's an important. But that's why we have you here, CJ, for updates. So the first thing we want to do is just reassure parents in the community. There was a brief, and I do want to emphasize brief, lockdown at Flagview Intermediate School earlier today, CJ, and that was really reassuring in that it was a successful drill and that the investigation concluded there was absolutely no danger, just some suspicious noises, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, just about as soon as we were able to communicate out to everyone that we were on lockdown at Flagview Intermediate. Basically, the police had already cleared the campus and the facilities, and we were able to lift that lockdown. So it was very quick, and yeah, it was due to the sheriff's office as they posted it, and we just shared the same post. It was due to some noisemakers that to an individual sounded like it could have been potentially gunfire, and so we have. What's important is we have empowered our staff to initiate a lockdown if they feel like there is some sort of emergency, such as gunfire or a dangerous intruder or something like that. And so this was, while it wasn't something dangerous, which is fantastic because we don't want anything dangerous on our campuses, while it wasn't that, what it did show was that our responses and our Centegix badges did exactly what they're supposed to do. It was initiated by a staff member. Both the SROs as well as the Sheriff's Office and Elko PD all responded very quickly and carried out the protocol to make sure that we were safe. And like I said, just as fast as we were on lockdown, we were lifted. We always encourage. It was mentioned in our posts to people and our information that in those situations, I know we worry about our children. I have a child at Flagview Intermediate, and so as a parent, I also was cognizant of that. But what's very important is in those situations, every additional body that shows up at campus and every additional factor that shows up creates more for the law enforcement to process, for the administrators to process. And so just as was evidenced in this scenario, while there was a lockdown, the administration and the staff handled it perfectly. The law enforcement did their job perfectly, and everyone was safe. And it's important to allow our first responders and our school administrators to do their job so that they can effectively carry out those procedures without additional factors or additional, influences that could. I mean, what I would encourage someone to think about is if there are police searching an area for someone who doesn't belong at that school right then, I would not encourage someone who shouldn't be there to show up at that time. You should let all that resolve itself. And I understand that some parents may be thinking that, regardless of the fact that this was not a threat, it was never a threat, that their child might be negatively impacted from a mental standpoint, like they're frazzled or whatever, and they just rather bring their kid home for the day. I get it. It's not what I would do as a parent, but I understand that someone would feel that way. It's still very important to allow that process to cool down and for the school to come off lockdown before anyone shows up to the school. It's very important to wait for communication is what I'm getting at. And as we showed today, we'll communicate very quickly as soon as we know the information. And just really glad it wasn't obviously anything truly dangerous. Nobody was ever in harm's way, and we're glad that school's back in session and Kids are probably eating lunch right now.
Well, there you go. And hopefully you're eating your lunch as you're listening to Elko Live with our school superintendent, CJ Anderson. Thank you, CJ. We appreciate that. That's very reassuring. The next topic was detailed quite thoroughly in the Elko Daily Free Press, so credit to them for reporting on the school district board of trustees considering the suspension and discipline policies. We just wanted to go over a few of the numbers which really stood out in the Free Press article, as CJ, as we were just talking about, because for parents or anybody reading this in the community, they may think, wow, there were a lot of suspensions and disciplinary actions taken in the school year. But it's important to kind of talk about and place this in perspective, right?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to talk about that. And, a lot of this is subjective, right? Like what someone thinks is a big deal, someone doesn't. And I'll say this, I mentioned it at one of our previous board meetings, I think where we first talked about this policy, that no administrator or teacher would be surprised by looking at these numbers. However, I could see how someone who's not a professional educator would see that and think, oh, wow, that's a ton. There's a couple of different ways I like to break this down for people to understand. So the data that was presented to our board members and shared with the Elko Daily Free Press, that included all events, discipline events of suspensions, both in school and out of school. And I think, without the numbers directly in front of me, it was more or less a 50-50 split on those numbers. So let's just say in one of those years, there were 800 of those events, right? Like if someone hears, oh my gosh, 800 times someone was suspended for 3 days or more, I get how at first that sounds like, wow. So a few things to consider. We have roughly over 9,000, not 10,000, but we have between 9 and 10,000 students. That's a lot of kids. And there's kind of a saying among school administrators that anywhere I've been, we all kind of say that roughly 5% of our population drives the majority of the discipline that happens. And the majority of discipline, so a lot of those events, so let's just keep going with that number 800. Some of those are going to be repeated and you're going to have students. So if you're on a campus of 1,000 kids, you're going to have roughly 50 that are driving a lot of that discipline, meaning they are getting suspended multiple times. They're bringing in lots of different events for you. And so obviously among that 800, many of those are duplicated. And another thing to think about is if you think about that 800 number, when you think about our school year, if there's 154 school days, you divide 800 by 154, and that comes out to a little over 5 per school day, if we want to think of it that way. And when you think that we have more than 20 facilities, that means any given day, there's about 4 of our schools or 5 of our schools that are having a single discipline event of 3 days or more occurring at that school. And so when you start to think about it that way, at least again, from a professional educator standpoint, I'm actually like that sounds really nice to me, actually, that only 1 in 5 of our schools is having a suspension event of 3 or more any given day. Another important point on that is those are in school and out of school suspensions. And those, a 3-day, and a lot of those are going to be exactly 3 days, based on our discipline matrix. But the numbers that we pulled, because of the language that the state put in NRS, they have something called a significant suspension, which means anything 3 days or greater. And so the vast majority of those, let's call it 800 again, are going to be pretty much right at 3 day. And there are a lot of things in our discipline matrix that would qualify someone for a 3-day suspension, and things as small as they've surpassed an excessive number of tardies, for example, or they skipped an after-school detention, or things like that. Those could result in in-school suspensions. And so when you think about those, roughly half or even more than half of those 800, they're still in school, they're there, but we still have to report on them as what the state calls significant suspensions. What we have here is, and this is the primary reason we're even working on these 2 policies, one of which was passed on Tuesday, and the other of which is going to come back again not next Tuesday, but the following one, the
21st. I think I've got the 21st.
21st.
Yep.
So on the 21st, we'll bring back the other one. One of those policies has to do with due process and how a student who has received a consequence of basically a discipline consequence that surpasses 2 weeks of school time, out of school suspension, something that significantly removes them from the educational environment. So what sort of measures exist for a student and family to I'm not going to use the word appeal because that's different, but to seek an alternate opinion on the situation and the facts of the matter and the consequence. And so there's a whole process, and it details that very clearly. And then the other one that's coming back on the 21st is very specifically about the appeals process for either something that was upheld by the due process that I mentioned before, or if something wasn't subject to due process, but is a significant suspension of 3 days or more, the state legislature, in all their wisdom, put an NRS out there that allows for people to appeal the decision of a site administrator for anything that is 3 days or greater. And so that's why we were looking at that data of 3 days or greater. And so we have new terminology because of that change in NRS. We have but some of that conflicts with our own internal terminology as well as our own internal processes. And so we're trying to make those all jive and match up. And there are even things that are as confusing as in our old policy, what was called an expulsion is what we now call a permanent expulsion. And so a permanent expulsion is when you're removed from Elko County School District for always and forever. Whereas an expulsion is something that is between a semester in length and a full school year in length. And so there are conflicting terms that the state used to use and we used to use and they now use or we currently use. And so really it's just to make sure that it's less confusing, because at this point it is confusing, right? And so I'm sure I probably didn't help to clarify any confusion there, but that's what we're seeking to do, is make sure the processes are clear, that the terms are clear, and that everyone understands what their basically what their rights are in any situation. Our schools are not courts of law, and so schools are subject to students are subject to discipline at schools for violating school policies, district policies, school rules, etc. And but we recognize that while we do a great job and we have very capable administrators, every now and then we could, bias could enter into something, or there could be a mistake that was made in investigation, or we may not have the facts right on something. And so leaving room for that error that could occur, we have these other processes that are in place. And so it's clarifying all that, and it's making sure it's there. The numbers were kind of I didn't expect the numbers to be as big a deal as some people are feeling about it. They were more of an afterthought just to kind of help give context to what we're talking about. And really the numbers came out because in the course of developing this policy and talking with board members, they were kind of wondering, well, how many of these happen? And not just the 3 or more, but how many long-term suspensions, which are greater than 2 weeks, how many of those happen in every given year? And how many expulsions? How many kids are gone for a semester or more every given year? And then how many of these are appealed every year? And so, I have no bad feelings towards all those questions the board members ask. They're trying to make the best decision to have a policy that makes sense to them, and so they can understand their role in the process too. And so, we provided all those numbers, and the numbers of the long-term suspensions, so of greater than 2 weeks, but less than a semester, those are even smaller. There's any given year, it could be anywhere from 15 of those to, we had a kind of a spike after COVID where we had almost 50 in a given year. But, a lot of people things were difficult during that time and coming out of that. And then as far as expulsions go, though, something that's more than a semester, less than a year, those are few and far between. I think we've had 2 or 3 this year. I think it was 3 this year. 2 the year before. So those don't happen very often.
And those are the important ones, again, to pay attention to, because not every one of these 800 cases represents some sort of violence. And that's the serious, that's what we should be concerned about. As you said, the expulsion, which is permanent, usually represents something that is very serious.
Yes. The vast majority of the 800 have nothing to do with violence. There are a few things, and in the policy, you'll see language that says statutorily imposed discipline. There's like three big things that kind of almost require something that's either an expulsion or a permanent expulsion. And those, if hopefully I can remember that. So one of them is battery or assault that results in injury, harm, right? In injury to a staff member. So that's one of them. Another would be the possession of a dangerous weapon on campus. And then the third would be possession or distribution of controlled substances on campus. So any of those three things could result in I almost said significant suspension, but that's a different thing, in an expulsion or a permanent expulsion. And depending on kind of the investigation, the facts of the situation, the perceived intent of the student in each situation, there's a lot of factors that go into how lengthy that suspension is, or whether it's an expulsion or a permanent expulsion. There's a lot of factors that go into that. And something that came up in our board meetings repeatedly, and I think it's so important to reiterate this for anyone who's listening, is that is not a decision that is ever taken lightly. The last thing a school administrator wants to do is remove a kid from their campus permanently. Like, that is, you don't want to do that. While a student may, I'll say this from having experience as a school administrator, while a kid may drive me nuts, I don't want them gone for good. I want them to get better, and I want them to fix their behavior, and I want them to feel more involved in the community of the school. I want them to feel a sense of belonging, right? And usually when there's a lot of acting out and persistent rules violations, it's because there's other things at play in that child's life. And you're seeking ways to try to remedy that and help that child have a sense of belonging and get on the path to success. So the opposite of that would be to get rid of someone. That doesn't resolve those issues, right? They don't have those resources there anymore. There's no counselor there to help them. There's no social worker available. They're not going to have contact with those positive influences that are their teachers and their administrators. So we always want to keep them there. It's when those statutorily imposed discipline events happen that it kind of ties our hands a little bit. I mean, could we totally disregard NRS? I suppose we could, but I would not advise doing that. And
there would be some liability with that, I'm sure, CJ.
Absolutely, a ton. So we're not going to do that. We're not going to disregard NRS, but we are going to take into account as much as we can about the individual child, the situation, what they're going through, et cetera, when we make those decisions. And they're never made lightly. No, despite what some kids or parents may feel because of their interactions and their experiences with discipline on campuses, no administrator wakes up every day thinking, how can I get rid of this kid? We're always thinking, how can we help this child?
Thank you, CJ. And then obviously the school board's also considering another important policy, which is the use of cell phones. And I think the community was invited to participate in a survey last fall. Yeah,
we had, an overwhelming response from people. As far as surveys go, sometimes surveys are a dud, but we had, I know it's always dangerous to do quick math live on air, but well over 4,000 responses between kids, staff, and parents, guardians of students. So we had well over 4,000 respondents, and we gave a different kind of track for the survey depending on if they were a student or staff member or parent. And, there's going to be some differences. Obviously, the kids are going to feel a certain way about having their phones with them compared to a parent, compared to a teacher. But that's the beauty and the value of doing this type of survey is you get those varied perspectives. There were some kind of common themes that occurred. One of those common themes is pretty much everyone agrees that our students, even students, agree that kids shouldn't just have free reign access to their phones all the time at school. Like, even the students recognize, no, you got to be paying attention in class when you're in class. And all of the adults in the equation, this differed from the kids. All the adults in the equation do feel kind of generally, I shouldn't say all, the majority of those two groups did agree that there needed to be some level of restriction there, and that maybe not have them on their person all the time, whereas a student might feel like, I should have access to that at all times. Something that really surprised me was there was a question for parents and guardians. One of those questions was, how frequently do you need to contact your child? And over half of the parents that responded said, typically never do they communicate with their kid throughout the school day, even though they have a cell phone with them. And so because one of the arguments against, further restrictions on cell phones is, well, I need to be able to get a hold of my kid if I need to. But most people said, typically, I don't contact my kid. There was a good chunk that also said, I typically contact my student 1 to 3 times per day. So for those people, it would be a little bit of an adjustment. I would encourage you not to contact your child during the school day when they're especially when they're in class. But that could include when they're at lunch, or because for all of our Elko High School students who leave campus during lunch, that's a perfectly normal time to contact your parent. And so our kids need to be, bottom line, our kids need to be focused on instruction at school. And another common theme across the board was generally kids, parents, and staff members felt like the presence of phones contributed negatively not only to the classroom instruction environment, but also to kids' interpersonal relationships and their interactions with their peers at school. And so, using those common themes, we're going that data is going to be utilized as part of making this policy. So where we are with that right now is I'm in the process of contacting individuals to be part of a committee that will work on providing the kind of first read draft of this policy to our board of trustees. This was another kind of overwhelming response area. One of the questions at the end of every survey for all 3 parties was, would you be interested in serving on a committee that would help develop this policy? We had somewhere in the neighborhood of close to 200 students who said they would be interested. We had close to 200 parents and guardians who said they would be interested, and we had roughly 100 staff members who said they would be interested. So here I am having to figure out how to determine which 9 people essentially I'm going to pull from a group of about 400 to 500, right?
That's great. Yeah.
So super grateful for everyone who is willing to be on that committee. So I'm going to have, again, I'm working on this. I want to make sure I'm trying to have a fair and representative group that takes part in this process. And so I've pretty much finalized who those 9 people are going to be, 3 from each of those groups. And then that committee would also consist of several district level staff members, in addition to the teaching staff that would be on there, in addition to the parents, in addition to the students. And so we're going to make sure all those voices are in there. And make sure that those voices aren't all homogenous, right? I'm going to get 3 parents, and one of those parents is going to feel pretty strongly that there shouldn't be cell phones, and one of those parents is going to feel pretty strongly that there ought to be all the time. And then there's going to be someone in the middle, and we're going to make sure we have a nice, diverse voice and hopefully come to some consensus on what is a reasonable policy.
Well, thank you, CJ. This is one to watch with that much community interest. Appreciate the update there and expect more to come, and we'll keep talking about it here on the radio. So thank you. We are just weeks away. In fact, Governor Lombardo will give the state address next Wednesday. And so we're heading into a legislative session here in February. And the school district is part of that.
We are almost there. Yeah. In fact, that is how I will kick off the legislative session as well, as attending the governor's State of the State address next Wednesday. So I'm excited to be there. I was supposed to be there last year, but had to miss it because of a delayed flight, and so that was a bummer. But I'm going to be there this year, and so we have various roles in our district and throughout the state as it pertains to the legislative session. The Elko County School District itself is not presenting any bill drafts for this session. However, the role that I will often play is as bills that impact education come to the forefront. or bills that, even if they're not directly associated with education, could have a financial impact on education. As those things come to the forefront, the superintendents as a group and in kind of small subgroups are approached with, hey, could you please give us your feedback on what the fiscal impact might be of this, or how is this bill, which seeks to improve teacher retention or whatever, is this a good bill, or are there complications with this that haven't been thought of? And so ever since about late November, we've already been approached by legislators and by their representatives to say, hey, would you take a look at this and let us know what you think? And so we're involved in that process. And sometimes they disregard, sometimes they make great edits, and sometimes we just get blindsided with something that we weren't told was coming. And so, but as the session progresses from February through late May into June, we will constantly be like in a feedback loop with different entities, with different legislators, with different groups, to make sure that we're the voice of public education is being heard and how it's going to impact us. And then we'll probably get asked to come present at different hearings and committee meetings and things like that as well. So, yeah.
And then teacher pay has got to be big on the list, right? That is the issue, or at least one of the bill drafts that is going in. We were hearing from the South. Yes, yeah, I heard the same.
Yes, so and something to keep in mind too is there's at this point already, I think, like over 2,000 bill drafts, and there certainly will be more to come. And so the vast majority of your bill drafts don't ever make it through even the first stages, never mind being written into law. And so, there could be a draft about teacher pay, but that could turn in, that could just dissipate at any point, and we don't know. There could be anything all over the spectrum about whether or not that thing has a chance to fly because of who supports it, and sometimes it's what else is in that bill, right? Like maybe the teacher pay thing is a thing that people generally agree on, but if there's other stuff in that bill that people don't agree on, then the whole bill dies, and then that thing goes away. And so it's pretty complicated how all that happens, and some things get drawn out, like a bill draft might be presented early in February, and then you're still hearing about it all the way into May and June. And sometimes something will come up and be the first anyone's heard about it, and it'll get approved right away. And you're like, oh, geez, that came out of nowhere, and now it's a law.
Yeah. Welcome to lawmaking.
Exactly.
Yes.
So it's really just a varied experience. And so what we do to make sure we're well informed as far as a superintendent's group, and that extends, what information I get, I share with my board and my district staff, is we have there are multiple lobbyists, whether appointed by the superintendent's organization or by some of our bigger school districts. It's like Clark County and Washoe County. They have their own lobbyists that are there, literally present every day for every meeting to hear everything that's going on, so they can quickly relay those things back to us, and we make sure people are giving input so nothing kind of gets missed or goes by the wayside.
So we know that's the process, but are there any big school issues, CJ, that you know of right now that either, your group will carry water for, or that we have our local lawmaker working on?
Yeah, so there's, I've been told of a bill that's going to be very heavy on like accountability for schools and how that's going to look. And, we recognize that because of an infusion of money 2 years ago, there was going to be accountability with that. And, no one's shying away from or scared of accountability. Like we're all accountable to someone in our jobs and in our families and in so many different ways in our lives. We're accountable to someone and something. And so, I think there's potential for something that's really, it could be a change to the accountability system. Who knows what that's going to look like. I know that, I've heard that one of our local legislators, Bert Gurr, is helping to sponsor a bill for some capital improvement for Ely, which is in White Pine County. They had a bill that failed 2 years ago to build a new school, an elementary school, I believe, in Ely. And so I think they're getting some support from him for that. And I don't want to give too much more information. I know you get to speak with him on a just as regular basis as you speak with me, so I'll leave him to answer those questions, which I'm sure you'll have for him. I've heard about the same one from the South that you were alluding to. That's actually includes a lot to do with education. It's not just teacher pay, but there'd be a lot of things in there.
Driven by Clark County School District. Yeah, that's why we usually feel like those are pretty weighted going in. Yeah. So really, it's early.
There's a lot, and it is early.
And you will be back each month.
I'll be back every month, and I'd be happy to share what I know about different bills and kind of where we stand on those. But what we do try to do, I'll say this, definitely from a rural perspective, is because of the 17 school districts and the charter authority that make up the Superintendents Association, 15 of those are all rural school districts, and so we are. That is the majority voice as far as people go in the room when we're talking about bills. And the other thing I will say too, and I did this 2 years ago, and I do this all the time. Sometimes Clark County and Washoe County get a little bit of a bad rap as far as looking out for themselves, and they get more than someone else does. My experience has been nothing other than the leadership at Clark County and the leadership at Washoe County speaking on behalf of the rural school districts and advocating for what we need as well. And they're very thoughtful when they put forth the bill draft of how that's going to impact us. And we make sure to let them know, and they make sure to be very sympathetic to that and understanding that they don't put something in that's going to negatively impact all of their colleagues and their school districts throughout the state. And so anything that comes from those school districts specifically is usually very thoughtfully considering the rural counties as well.
And that is significant because we see the impacts when, for example, Nevada's system of higher education, they don't act in that way, and then they impose formulas that are very unfair to rural communities. So we're still living with the aftermath of that. So So that's good news. Again, our 17 school district superintendents meet regularly. You have a state organization. That's why I think that you talk about these issues and you work as one to benefit students and communities. So with that in mind, we're going to get ready to end the program. But you did mention funding for schools, and we wanted to check in on money that was led a couple of years ago. It's hard to believe, but
I know, right?
Yeah, a couple of years ago. News on the Owyhee school. Still hoping for some progress on that one, CJ.
Yeah, so without going through the entire saga of the last 2 years or even the last kind of 4 months, which were, the most recent development, but where we are right now is the school, the scope of the project has been kind of reduced down a little bit to make sure that it matches the amount of money that is available. And so that project is currently out to bid, and we're anticipating having those bids back in and opening them by January 23rd, which is 2 weeks from today. And then from everything I'm hearing and understanding is it's going to be a better result this time as far as quantity of bids and responsiveness and ability to meet that dollar amount. So it feels like it's in a better place now than it was back in, I think it was October, maybe somewhere around there when we last bid, maybe September. And so we're anticipating getting multiple bids, and we're anticipating being able to move forward. I keep saying anticipating because you never know, right? Like things develop how they develop, but we're hopeful that it's going to be better this time around. And so with the bids coming in on the 23rd, our next board meeting after that wouldn't be until February 4th. So that might be the board meeting to look to for when we might hear more about that. And there's also always a couple of fun things that happen at board meetings in February as well. So February might be we might have a lot to talk about in February is what I'm saying.
All right. That sounds great. And as always, we check in as often as we need to. School Superintendent CJ Anderson. Check out the school district website. I just wanted to give a quick plug for resources online. January Mental Health Help is been rebooted, and there are all kinds of accessible courses, classes, opportunities that can be done in complete confidence on your own schedule, free of charge, and brought to you by the school district to help parents and their students students navigate any number of issues and problems, from bullying to, suicide ideation, some of the most serious problems and complications that a student, a family, and a community can navigate. So those are all online, right?
Yes, go to our Facebook page. Our communication specialist, Kayla, does a great job of making sure to share these. And if you go to our Facebook page, it would be like the third or fourth post down, and you'll find a calendar of different mental health supports and events and webinars and things like that. And I appreciate you mentioning the variety of topics. There's almost one every single day, and that's important to know. Like, so today's available one is called Everyday Happiness. Next week we'll have one on depression. There will be one on suicide prevention. There will be one on video game addiction. There will be one on mindfulness for improving mental health. So the topics really do vary, and the goal of doing it this way now is to make sure that we're reaching a wider audience with more frequency of varied topics, so that more people get more help more regularly, I guess.
That sounds great. Include it in your routine, and know that those sessions are archived too, so you don't have to do them live. You can just go back in and pull them up. CJ, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to be here with you.
CJ Anderson is our Elko County School Superintendent here on Elko Live Today.